Hi, here we are in beautiful Gloucester docks. You can see the backdrop and we're still in the lockdown, so we've got the 2 metres distance between us. But I'm really here today to talk about Marketing Gloucester and what happened last year and is still ongoing in terms of money belonging to the ratepayers, the council taxpayers of Gloucester, given to Marketing Gloucester Limited and basically what happened. And with me I've got a lady, Debbie Hill, who used to work for Marketing Gloucester Limited and has been very, very involved with the situation there. So, morning, Debbie.
Morning, Richard.
Morning. I'd like to just ask you then, just tell us in your own words, really, what happened last year, the money that was sent from the City Council, how that came to pass, and a bit of the background and a bit of the history.
So my understanding is that October last year, the financial situation at Marketing Gloucester came to a head, and the former chief exec of Marketing Gloucester had to ask Gloucester City Council for a bailout loan to see them through until the end of the current financial year, which was 2019-20.
So that was October 2019?
It's October 2019, for a sum of £240,000. Now my understanding is that got signed off by a cabinet member under their delegated authority, but councillors at Gloucester obviously spotted it and weren't happy and called it in for a discussion.
So you could tell us about events regarding the loan of £240,000 being made to Marketing Gloucester Limited in October of 2019, how that came to pass?
Yes, that came to pass. Marketing Gloucester had to ask for a loan of £240,000 to see them through until the end of the financial year 1920. This request was signed off by a cabinet member under their delegated authority, but it was spotted and called in by, I believe, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And whilst the call-in actually failed, what then happened was there was an investigation into this financial situation and also the running of Marketing Gloucester.
Was this an external investigation?
Yes, it was an external investigation. I believe it was Grant Thornton that did the financial side and another company that looked into the performance, really, on a business as usual basis of Marketing Gloucester. And what was agreed was that these two external reports would then be presented and discussed in public at Overview and Scrutiny, and that was a meeting that was held in December. So whilst the call-in failed, it was actually discussed in public. And it's become clear since then in Overview and Scrutiny in March this year that actually it wasn't true, that the £240,000 wasn't sufficient to see them through to the end of the financial year.
Do you think it could have been foreseen that would have been the situation at Marketing Gloucester was so dire that £240,000 effectively would just be thrown away and was never going to be sufficient to have saved the company?
I think if all the information had been given at the time, the assurances that were given should have given the true picture, and if that had been given, it would have been quite clear that £240,000 wasn't sufficient.
So you don't think all the assurances were given to Grant Thornton at the time?
Well, I think it was not Grant Thornton, it would have been the City Council.
Right.
The councillors, whether I presume it was Cabinet, that actually considered the request for that £240,000.
So in these dire financial times, obviously before lockdown, but nevertheless lots of demands on local authority for funding, reduction in central funding of local authorities and all the rest of it, almost £250,000 was effective. We might as well have just picked it up and thrown it in the dock here.
In essence, yes. It could have been, if that £240,000 hadn't been given, it would have become insolvent at that time, and then the City Council wouldn't then have loaned council taxpayers' money.
On top of the loan that already was in Marketing Gloucester from the City Council?
Yes, I mean the loan that was already in Marketing Gloucester from the City Council was quite historic, and I think at one point the City Council were looking at actually writing it off because Marketing Gloucester had repaid some of it, and it was an ongoing facility that was just renewed each year. So with Marketing Gloucester performing as they thought they were, I believe they would have considered writing that off.
So would you like to take us back, because I know you used to work for Marketing Gloucester Limited and there were certain aspects of the governance or alleged lack of governance of the company that you were concerned about, which you brought to the attention of the powers that be back in, I think it was 2014. We're now in 2020, so 6 years ago and 5.5 years before the insolvency. Would you just like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I became concerned about how Marketing Gloucester was being run back at the beginning probably of 2014, and in the first half of 2014 it got progressively worse and I became more and more concerned, and my concerns were mainly over the running of a company by the former chief executive in terms of financial management of the company, in terms of...
And the accountant presumably as well.
Well, Marketing Gloucester had a bookkeeper, but they had an accountant who was a board member who used to oversee the accounts. So I became more and more concerned about, as I said, the financial management, other ways the company was being run, and also the general culture, I suppose, in the company, and actions being taken and behaviour really of the former chief executive.
So effectively, you brought that to the attention of somebody as a whistleblower, effectively. Who did you bring it to the attention of?
Yeah, so Marketing Gloucester was a company wholly owned by Gloucester City Council, and Marketing Gloucester had a whistleblowing policy, but because the concerns were so high level and about the former chief executive officer, I had to use Gloucester City Council's whistleblowing policy, and I had many meetings with Gloucester City Council. Whistleblowing allegations aren't taken lightly by anybody. It's not a pleasant thing to go through, and Gloucester City Council looked into all our concerns, because I did actually did whistleblowing with a colleague, and Gloucester City Council looked into it in great depth before they even took it on. You can't just take somebody at face value. You have to investigate in the first instance to even know there is a...
They want to see there's a prima facie case before spending time on it, because lots of people complain all the time and don't have any grounds. So your grounds for complaint were sufficient for them to launch an investigation.
Absolutely. So the whistleblowing was done in July 2014, and the former chief executive was suspended pending an investigation, and that investigation was...
Back in 2014.
2014 was lengthy. I wasn't happy at the time with the company that was used to do the investigation, because I think probably for me personally there were issues that company was good to look at, but if you like, council taxpayers' money and the finances I felt weren't probably investigated as well as they could.
Sufficiently enough. Right.
Just because of the company that investigated.
And which was the company that investigated?
It was an HR company. The company doesn't exist any longer, but it wasn't an HR company, although I was told they were seeking finance advice, but I don't know who that was from or whether that was actually done. But
the report that this company prepared, that subsequently disappeared, I believe.
Yeah, so what happened at the time was an extensive whistleblowing report was produced, and we were always told that we, as whistleblowers, we wouldn't see the report. Now, I understand it was a lengthy report, and it went to the chair of Marketing Gloucester, who is also the ex-leader of Gloucester City Council, and it also went to a couple of board members of Marketing Gloucester. And then what happened was a summary report was produced, I don't know who by, that went to a board meeting for all board members to consider what they were going to do.
Right. So you made a complaint under the council's whistleblowing policy. They were Marketing Gloucester was a wholly owned subsidiary of the council, so that was the correct thing for yourself and your colleague to do. There were sufficient grounds on initial investigation to do, on initial research to do the full investigation. That happened by a professional company. A lengthy report was prepared, a condensed report was prepared, and they've all since disappeared.
So, I've done subject access requests to all the companies that had board members at that time. I've also done subject access requests to the City Council and Marketing Gloucester before they disappeared, and my investigations have found that there are 2 copies of the report that still exist in companies of former directors, members of the board, but Gloucester City Council have maintained that they do not have a paper or electronic copy of the whistleblowing report.
So copies of the report exist at 2 companies, private companies owned by individuals who are also directors of Marketing Gloucester Limited. Has Gloucester City Council written to those companies or those directors to try and obtain copies of the missing report?
I don't know.
That would be an obvious move, wouldn't it, for them to make?
It would be, but I'm not sure that Gloucester City Council have tried very hard to find the report yet. I would like to point out that the whistleblowing allegations were covered by a comprehensive policy at Gloucester City Council, so they had a whistleblowing policy, And the whistleblowing policy made it quite clear exactly what had to be done throughout the investigation and what documentation had to be retained. And it is very clear, both from the whistleblowing policy and also their document retention policy they have at that time, that something as serious as a whistleblowing report should have been retained. So the fact that it hasn't been retained is very worrying.
It's a dereliction of the duty of the duty of care, basically, of the council to retain that document on behalf of the investigators. They've obviously paid for this investigation quite a bit of money, and for the thing to have disappeared and then not to pursue it when they could find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Marketing Gloucester paid for the investigation, and obviously the decision was based on the report was made by Marketing Gloucester, but because Gloucester City Council's whistleblowing policy had been invoked, they had a duty to ensure that the whole process was dealt with correctly, which is why they had to receive a copy of a report.
Right.
And I know they received a copy of the report.
Right.
But in essence, this was raised at Overview and Scrutiny meeting in March this year.
2020.
I raised a question at the meeting about why the whistleblowing report had been destroyed when all the evidence shows that it should have been retained, and I was given the answer that a whistleblowing case about a company that isn't Gloucester City Council, so a non-specific Gloucester City Council whistleblowing report doesn't need to be retained.
Even though it's a wholly owned, 100% share-owned subsidiary.
Yeah, and even though the whole process, this is what I don't understand, because if you invoke a policy and a process, then you follow it. You don't pick and choose what you want. You don't follow it all the way along and then right at the end say, oh, I'm going to make this up and destroy this report because I don't think we need to keep it. There was no option for that. It should have been retained.
It should have been retained. But that's part of a whole catalogue of events and actions and things that happened, I think, at Marketing Gloucester. I mean, perhaps you'd just... Obviously, there was the £250,000 nearly that was lent at the back end of 2019. Before that, obviously, there was a substantial amount of money lent, as you say, on a rolling basis. And Marketing Gloucester had never actually made any money, I don't believe, and would have been insolvent and unable to continue trading had it not been for this loan from the City Council. How much was that initial loan? Can you perhaps remember that?
The initial loan was just over £100,000, and actually Marketing Gloucester did repay part of that loan after the Tall Ships Festival in 2013, and that's the level that it then remained at, which was just under £100,000.
Right, so there was £100,000 plus another £240,000 plus various grants that had come from G Life, I think, and other G First, sorry, and other organisations. Can you just tell me very quickly about the business with the Drick in the Eastgate shopping centre?
Yeah, I'm not totally knowledgeable about the UK Drick, but I understand it was set up as a subsidiary of Marketing Gloucester. I believe there were two companies set up at Companies House, and that directors or board members of Marketing Gloucester didn't know that the company had been actually set up, and that...
So board members of Marketing Gloucester didn't know their own company had set up a subsidiary, basically, is what you're saying?
That's my understanding. I believe they knew that I believe they knew the company existed, but I don't believe they knew how it had been set up. So in essence, it had been set up with the former chief exec as a director and the former bookkeeper as a director.
And Drick received a substantial grant, I believe, from...
Yeah, Drick received a substantial grant from G First.
How much was that, can you remember?
400,000.
It was 400,000, you're quite right. So it was 400,000 from Drick, 340,000 from the City Council, plus other various grants. Well, hi, so we've relocated to a different part of Gloucester Docks. Hopefully you can see Gloucester's famous medieval cathedral through here, and of course industrial heritage, the gantry here of these wonderful docks. Come and have a look if you don't live in Gloucester. It's a great location. But we want to carry on with the business of Marketing Gloucester. Marketing Gloucester, of course, did a good job of marketing the city, but the question is the cost and how the company was governed. And I was saying before about Drick, that was a £400,000 grant, which was totally spent and had to be bailed out by the City Council for another £76,000. So effectively 400,000 plus 76,000 plus 240,000 plus 97,000 plus other bits and bobs. We're getting up to £700,000-800,000 worth of grant money. But anyway, just to go back a bit to Debbie, who used to work, who as she mentioned was one of the whistleblowers, used to work for Marketing Gloucester, and obviously which prompted the report, which subsequently disappeared or is only in two people's offices but hasn't been asked for yet. So what I'd like to ask you, Debbie, is how it came that you blew the whistle. Obviously you're working, you had an income, you had a job, family, all the rest of it. No one goes and blows the whistle on the company they work for lightly. Clearly yourself and your colleague thought about that, thought about the implications. I think at the end of the day you lost your job over it. So it had penalties for you and implications for your family as well. So a serious thing to do, and a great shame obviously that report seems to have been mislaid, but nevertheless a big thing for you to do back in 2014. So there must have been some serious concerns that you had, and what caused you to take that serious course of action?
Yeah, I mean, really, if I'm honest, my concerns were from virtually day one, when the former chief exec was recruited back in December 2013. I was very concerned, and I passed all my concerns on to the former leader of the City Council and chairman of Marketing Gloucester.
That's the long-standing leader.
The long-standing leader, yeah. About generally the whole recruitment process. I was concerned about the recruitment process. I was also concerned about the way in which the former chief exec was engaged by Marketing Gloucester. So the job was a normal employed job. We were all employed at Marketing Gloucester, and the advert went out for a job. It was a pro rata job, 2 days a week, and there was a set amount in the budget to cover that job. Now, it was an employed position, but for whatever reason, the former CEO performed that role on a self-employed basis.
So he put his own invoices in?
He put his own invoices in. So obviously he worked, and what he worked, he invoiced for, and that was signed off. So
Who signed that off?
So it was signed off by the chairman of Marketing Gloucester at the time. And so in essence, all the staff at Marketing Gloucester worked their core hours and were paid their core hours. Nobody was entitled to overtime payments. If we did work extra hours, which we did from time to time, we received time off in lieu for that. But with this self-employed arrangement, the hours were approved and paid, and it was quite obvious not far into the financial year of 2014-15, by the end of the first quarter, that there was a serious overspend going to occur, because the amount being invoiced was way more than was budgeted for.
Were hours being invoiced that hadn't been worked for, or it was just simply they hadn't been budgeted for?
I believe they'd been worked for, but they hadn't been budgeted for. The role was 2 days a week, but the role was actually being done 3 or 4 days a week.
So it was over budget basically, which again, in a company that never made a profit and that had serious financial stresses and strains.
Absolutely. It's simple maths, isn't it? That actually, if you're spending more than you've got coming in, then you're going to have problems.
Like your own household.
Like your own household. And Marketing Gloucester's budgets were tight. It was never a company that was meant to make a huge profit, and it had certain things it was meant to do for the City Council. There was a funding and management agreement, and other agreements that in place for what they were expected to do. So it was quite clearly set up for the staff there to do certain roles, and for the chief exec to perform a certain role 2 days a week. And the other thing that concerned me at the time is basically, if you're self-employed, you don't claim expenses, you don't claim mileage, you don't claim for a new battery on your laptop, other things like that. So you put that through your tax return. You're self-employed, that's how you do it. But
you're a contractor to the company, and your own costs are part of the fee that you charge the company.
But not at Marketing Gloucester. He was not only self-employed, but he was also putting in expenses, taxes, mileage, battery for a laptop, all being signed off and approved. And that was another concern that we had.
Okay. So you raised those concerns in the first place with whom?
The concerns were raised with the former chief exec. I think I should also set a picture of the working environment. And until the chief exec had joined, the former chief exec joined, we had quite an open working environment. So the people there were responsible for their own budgets. I was the office manager. I had obviously my budget that I was responsible for, and we all approved invoices. So if it was destination marketing, the destination marketing manager would sign off those invoices and also control that budget.
So the financial controls were in place?
They were in place. Now, after a period of time of the former chief exec being in post, he removed all those controls and was the only one that was signing off on invoices and wanted to control everything to do with the finances. So we used to have regular team meetings to discuss cash flow, projected income and expenditure, and how we were doing. Monitoring against our budget, against the performance, and all that stopped.
So there was no counter signatories to that then, when the financial arrangements, when the signing off changed, there were no counter signatories?
No.
So I think the theme, and it came through, because I was at the meeting as well in March of Gloucester City Council, full council, which was the last meeting in person. And what came across, I think, very strongly in that meeting was that the lack of governance, lack of financial controls you've just mentioned, lack of scrutiny from the wholly owned party, which obviously the City Council was the owner of Marketing Gloucester, and the former chief executive, the long-standing former leader of the council, pretty much said because he was put on question by other councillors, pretty much said he didn't have the time to do that. And I remember thinking at the time, well, if you didn't have the time, why didn't you resign and let somebody else who did have the time? Because clearly, apart from the fact that we've established that at least £1 million had gone into Marketing Gloucester, the fact is a very important role was being done by it for the city in terms of Marketing Gloucester. So it seems strange that there was a general lack of scrutiny, not just obviously financially is important, but also in governance terms. And I know certain massive conduct of certain employees and contractors for the company as well were an issue. And would you think that was a fair comment then, I guess?
I think it's a fair comment, but I think it needs to be considered in the overall scheme of when I was there as office manager and the chief exec was in post prior to the chief exec we're talking about.
The previous chief exec.
Previous chief exec. I believe the financial controls were there. It was all finances were open and transparent, regularly reviewed by the board members. As I said, we had a bookkeeper. The accountant used to come in and work regularly with the bookkeeper. It was very open and transparent, and as far as it would be in a limited company. Now, the practices that were put in place completely changed that.
If you could just clarify that for me again, because you said the former chairman had the responsibility to sign off the expenses and so on for the former chief executive when he became a contractor. But I was at the council meeting back in March of 2020 when the former chief executive, former leader of the council, said that he didn't know what was going on, he didn't sign off expenses, he didn't know anything about it. Kind of the Nuremberg defence, really. And so, which is it?
Well, I know because I was the office manager. I can assure you that the former leader of the City Council, or chairman of Marketing Gloucester, signed off on those expenses. I was aware of an email that said that the former chief exec could sign off on his own expenses up to a certain amount of money, which just in itself is a very odd concept.
Who signs off on their own expenses? I'd love a job like that.
I'd love a job like that as well. And that any expenses over a certain amount had to be referred to him.
So he was given carte blanche, the former chief executive was given carte blanche by the former chairman to sign off on his own expenses up to a certain amount with no scrutiny.
Absolutely. And not just that, there were issues around questions that were asked about the former chairman of Marketing Gloucester and the amount of involvement he had in kind of the day-to-day finances.
This is in the meeting in March.
Which is in the meeting in March. So, for example, there was an issue around the signing off of cheques because he denied that he had any involvement really in these finances, and it was pointed out to him that he was the sole signatory on the bank account of Marketing Gloucester.
So he had to be involved because he's a sole
signatory. He had
signatory.
to be involved. I can regularly remember sending cheques over for him to sign, and he came into the office on quite a regular basis and had regular conversations with the bookkeeper and was involved, quite frankly, quite in depth in the running of a company.
So the statements to the committee back in March of 2020 were inexact?
No, they weren't exact.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. That's a concern. But another reason why why the whole matter can't be allowed to drop. I think the public is entitled to know the way their money is spent. So, from what I understand, and obviously from having looked at some of the documents that are still available and having attended the most recent council meeting, the issues that you're flagging up originally were in place with the previous chief executive. With the most recent chief executive, they were not as robust, shall we say, and you and your colleague back in 2014 made the City Council aware of that via the whistleblowing policy, and frankly the whole thing could have been called out 5 years earlier than it actually did. But what happened in actual fact was a report was prepared, the report was lost, you and your colleague lost your jobs, and nothing was done until a train came running into the station and hit the platform wall 5 years later. Is that a fair summary?
It is a fair summary. I mean, personally, I'm absolutely appalled that this has happened. I live in Gloucester, I pay council tax money. I'm furious that my money has been wasted in this way. Everything that has come out that has happened in 2019 was all there in 2014. We saw it, we reported it. There were other issues as well with behaviour and generally the way the company was run and things that were going on. It was all there. It could have been prevented 5 years ago, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, the report, I don't know what the report said, but he was allowed back from having been suspended.
The former chief exec.
He was suspended for 2 months, and the made my position completely untenable. Unfortunately, I went off sick, and then I left at the end of December 2014.
Okay, so I think it's very clear that there are issues to do with Marketing Gloucester that are still unresolved. There needs to be, we live in a democracy, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be scrutiny. We need to have sight of the whistleblowers report if they're currently existent, as Debbie has said, because people need confidence. People are struggling at the moment, even before the lockdown. People struggle to pay their council tax. And here we are seeing substantial amounts of public money which could have been so much better used in other areas. Let's learn from the benefit of hindsight. Let's not allow this thing to happen again. But also let's not allow this now to be shoved under the carpet. It's been brought up. It was brought up 5 years ago, was ignored. It's been brought up more recently, 6 months ago now. We're now in June 2020. Obviously things have been put on hold massively by the lockdown. But if the lockdown ends, or when the lockdown ends, I think this is something that does need scrutiny again to re-establish public confidence in the way that the public's money is being spent and the way that public officials are held to account. And frankly, to encourage other people like Debbie and her colleague who very bravely put their own incomes, their own jobs at risk on behalf of the public, that's you and me, to say these things. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed, Debbie.
Thank you.
And, you know, we need to look at it. It needs to be done. We can't allow it to be just forgotten about and quietly shoved under the carpet. And I forgot to say before, we've moved location. Lovely docks here in Gloucester, of course, with the seagulls. We moved to keep out of the way, but they seem to have followed us. But hopefully you'll have heard us. But thank you very much, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.